Blood and Ruin. Prologue. Soft waves lapped against the shoreline, the movement serving as the only evidence that the smooth black sheet of the ocean was separate from the smooth black sheet of the sky. A dwarven man sat on the shoreline, a sword at his side as the waves broke upon the sand. He crossed his arms, using the stick in his hand to stoke the fire in front of him. He knew it would die soon, that stoking it was only delaying the inevitable, but he stoked it anyways. He wore a dark cloak and a boiled leather cuirass with the head of a wyvern emblazoned on the chest. The armor was ill-fitting and loose, as if it had been tailored to the frame of a much larger man, a younger and more well-fed man. This man was thin and gray, balding around the top of his head. His eyes were hazy and pale, and tired, so very tired. The man already looked half a corpse, but he couldn't die yet, not when there was still work to be done, not when his watch had not yet come to an end. Garrick Monsimard had joined up with the Velmeran Dragon Guard after leaving the Deep Kingdoms as a much younger man, shortly before the outbreak of that King Marcus's insurrection. He was close to 80 now, one of the oldest Dragon Guard left in Velmera, and by his accounts, probably one of the last to actually remember the rebellion, now that the former Lord Umber had died. Garrick had never met the man himself, but he had observed much of his exploits during the rebellion and after. His daughter sat at the throne of Aethel now, if he recalled correctly, along with Marcus's son, King Harold. Not that the goings-ons of human kings and lords was any concern of his. The only thing that Garrick Monsimard cared about was watching the water. He grabbed his water skin from his side and took a short sip. It was near empty, and even though his leather gloves, he could feel it had begun to freeze. Tyr's frost was fast approaching, the frost that would herald the coming of winter, and then Garrick would be the only dragon guard left to watch the coast in the cold, as it had been for the last decade or more. The rest would go home to their families, if they had any to speak of. A young man came up on Garrick from behind, the sword on his belt clattering loudly against the rivets of his leather boots, signaling his approach. His eyes were brighter, his armor fit him better, and he had a mop of curly red hair that hung over his pointed ears and ringlets. "The cold killed you yet, old man?" "You'd be so lucky," he grunted, then coughed. The young man nodded. "You're right, I would be. I'll bet I get that fancy sword of yours once you bite it. I know I'm your favorite. Don't even try to deny it." Garrick rolled his eyes. Tevin was a capricious and fiery young man, prone to flights of fancy. But he was right about that. He was the man's favorite of the initiates he'd brought into the fold. He always listened to his war stories and never once asked, "Was King Marcus there?" or "Did you really know the traitor lord?" "I'm not dying anytime soon, garçon." Tevin sighed and dropped down to the sand next to him. "You're probably right on that. You'll outlive us all." He reached for his side and pulled out a flask from a compartment on his belt, taking a short swig. He scrunched up his nose and shook his head. "Nearer to piss than beer, that is, but it'll warm your belly. Care for a drink?" He offered the flask to the older man. Garrick raised an eyebrow. "I can smell it from here. Where does Junet like you find dwarven ale?" He shot him a grin, flashing those sharp elven incisors and wiggling his eyebrows. "I have my ways, old man." He took the flask from him and took a swig, letting the liquid roll down his throat. Even with the coastal winds coming from the ocean and the chill setting over his bones, the old dwarf felt a bit of warmth as it trickled into his stomach. He couldn't see the color through the flask, but if he could, he'd guess it was dark ale, rich and spiced with herbs that dwarves had imported from the surface. Cinnamon and nutmeg, maybe? He handed the flask back, nodding without looking at the boy, without taking his eyes off the sea of shadows. Tevin returned the flask to his side, staring out the water with him. "Have you ever seen anything, old man?" he asked after a long, quiet moment. Garrick grunted. "A draug, you mean?" He shrugged. "Or a kraken, or a mermaid. Anything, really. These waters are too cold for any mermaids, and kraken prefer deeper water." Tevin glanced over at him, looking as if he couldn't tell if he was joking or not. "I served in Velmera during the last cataclysm. The High Dragon Guard ensured it never reached beyond the bulwarks. The most we had to deal with were helping the refugees flee the hordes. Ordinarily, people are slow to trust the Undermountain men, but during a cataclysm, such preconceptions are lost." "So you've never seen a draug?" Garrick was silent for a moment. "I didn't say that." Tevin's eyes lit up, the way young boys did when you got to a particular gruesome part of a fairy story. "Well, don't leave me in suspense. It's not a pleasant story, Fiston. I'd like to hear it anyways." The dwarf sighed, then sat back slightly. It was when I was a younger man, when my beard was still black and my eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. Tevin snorted. I'm struggling to imagine that. He shot him a look. As I was saying, I was young and foolish and dreamed of adventure. I had just left the breach, the nearest of the deep kingdoms of the surface. Tova came with me. She was my... Well, it doesn't matter now. We leave all that behind when we become men and women of the Dragon Guard. Regardless, we surfaced just outside Mare in Velmera. I wanted to see the city, but Tova just wanted to see the water, so we went to the coast. Breach has a few subterranean lakes. It's close enough to the surface for rainwater to trickle down, but it's nothing compared to the oceans you have here. She was so excited. I don't think I've ever seen those dark eyes light up the way she did when she gazed across the great blue sheet. It was bigger than anything either of us had ever seen. And even though we knew Arcanum and Dejar were just on the other side, it seemed to go on forever. Tova decided she wanted to be a sailor right then and there, and I just laughed, and she laughed, and gods, under the mountain, it was a beautiful sound. Garrick's voice caught in his throat, and Tevin's expression changed. He's far too old to cry now, but the younger man could tell he was teetering on the edge. He opened his mouth, maybe to offer comfort, maybe derision, but Garrick didn't give him a chance to do either. He carried on. I had my eyes closed, that's why I didn't see it coming out of the water. And the day was windy, and the waves crashing on the rocky shore, that's why I couldn't hear it. But the smell, all the shit and rot in the world couldn't mask that wretched smell. There's nothing like it. Salty and sour and rotten, like something that died 1,000 years ago and never stopped decaying. I wasn't a warrior then. I had my father's sword, but I was a green boy yet, and I hadn't the faintest clue how to use it. Tova was more skilled, but she had her back to the shore, looking at me. If she had more time, she might have... He stopped, shaking his head. No matter. She didn't see it coming. She likely couldn't have stopped the blade, even if she did. Draug weapons are made of sturdier stuff than mere iron or steel. It pierced her clean through the chest, cutting off her laugh like it was bird song, silenced by a hunter's arrow. I remember screaming, but she didn't make a sound. She just slid off the blade and fell to the ground like a sack of meat. The thing behind her was monstrous. Eyes black as onyx and teeth like rotten wood. Its skin was wet and soggy, and even if I stared at it, bits of it sloughed off and mixed with the blood that was spreading beneath Tova. It was dressed like no man had ever seen. Even the traders from Dejar with their beads and bells were not near as strange as the dress this creature wore. The armor seemed to be carved from stone, dragon bone, as I later learned, and looked almost like roof shingles I'd seen in the paintings of surfacer homes. I thought it would be terrible, for my last thoughts before I died, to be of roof shingles. So I tried to think of something else, but all that would come to mind was the other kind of roofs I've seen in pictures. The thing raised its blade, and I was dead certain I was about to die with nothing but fucking surfacer architecture on my mind. And then suddenly its head jerked back, and there was an arrow between its eyes. "The Dragon Guard!" Tevin exclaimed, a light young child hearing their favorite story for the umpteenth time and excited to call it the twist. His pale face immediately turned red as he realized what he'd done, and Garrett couldn't help but laugh. "Yes, Fiston, the Dragon Guard. It was a young recruit, not much older than yourself, out on her first solo patrol. I could say it was someone important like Lyanna Gael herself, but that would be a lie. I never learned the woman's name, and she died a few years later on one of the Dragon Guard's many doomed expeditions in the black caverns that connect the deep kingdoms." "Did she initiate you into the Dragon Guard?" He chuckled. No, I wasn't ready for that yet, and they wouldn't have taken me even if I were. The Dragon Guard seek out men of some skill, and at the time, I was not. I joined up with the Velmeran infantry for a time, but luckily managed to serve my time before the Aethic rebels took up arms against us. It was a man called Blaggard who officially initiated me, made me drink that awful stuff that left me with shakes and nightmares for months. Tevin's eyes widened. "The nightmares stopped for you?" He let out a humorless laugh. "No, they didn't. But the shakes did. I stopped waking up morning more tired than the night before." Tevin went quiet after that, and Garrick silently thanked the gods under and over the mountain for that. He looked back across the water, in the black of the sea and the black of the sky. He could have sworn he saw two black eyes staring back at him.